You just realized that you needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job posts seen on other job sites. Indeed sponsored jobs help you stand out and hire fast. With sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates so you can reach the people that you want faster. And it makes a huge difference. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Plus, with Indeed sponsored jobs, there's no monthly subscriptions, no long-term contracts, and you only pay for results. How fast is Indeed? Well, in the minute I've been talking to you, 23 hires were made on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. There's no need to wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/BWN. Just go to Indeed.com/BWN right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/BWN. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
Hello, Mavs fans. Welcome to Pod Maverick After Dark. No, not Pod Maverick After Dark. That shows you what time of day it is for me. This is Kirk Henderson. I'm joined by Josh Bowe as always, and we are joined today by special guest Tim MacMahon of ESPN. You know him, and I'm sure all of you absolutely love him. Tim, how are you today?
Howdy, partners. It is a pleasure to be here.
So you guys can probably guess why Tim is here. He has is it forthcoming or is it out yet? It's
March 25th is the actual published date.
We have roughly 11 days until his upcoming book, The Wonder Boy, Luka Doncic and the Curse of Greatness, hits anywhere you can buy a book. Josh and I both were lucky enough to receive early edition copies, is I think what we'll phrase this as, about a month ago, actually about 2 months ago at this point, and had the opportunity to read it and then reread it again since the trade, as I really seem to like traumatizing myself. And we're here to talk to you today a little bit about the book, and then we'll probably ask Tim a few more questions. So Tim, I got to be honest with you. Josh and I are not the most prepared podcasters, but we did actually read your book, so we didn't actually we didn't actually cross-check questions. So, I'm going to start, and then we'll let Josh go from here because Josh is the actual journalist. Luka was drafted in June of 2018. At what point did this book kind of start formulating in your head that you were going to do something?
I was approached about the opportunity during the 21-22 season. Agreed to the deal midway through that season. Obviously I've got a full-time job that doesn't allow for a lot of free time. So basically I said, hey, let's make it, I can spend 2022 summer kind of, researching. I went to Slovenia that summer, went to the beginning of Eurobasket, saw Luka play for Slovenia national team, the group play. Did a bunch of research, interviews, et cetera, et cetera. And the plan was to write it in the summer of 23. There were some changes at the publishing company, and so it got bumped back a year. And it was very fortunate timing for me because the ending would have been, think about it, the way that 2023 season ended, this massive trade and then into a tank, and the fear, people didn't want to hear it, but the fear within the organization at the time was absolutely that if they didn't get this ship turned around, that Luka would go to them and ask for a trade. Let me be very clear. Luka never made a threat that I'm aware of. Luka never, that I'm aware of, even discussed that, but that was absolutely the fear, which it is. It's a common sense fear, right? Anyway, so the book would have come out last March, like kind of with this gloomy, doomy ending, and then whoosh, they go off to the finals. It would have been rough timing. Instead, they get the thing turned around. They go to the finals. So, the early edition, like you said, has a really kind of an upbeat, still open-ended, but upbeat, positive ending. And then before the book actually publishes, they turn around and they decide to trade the guy. He didn't ask. He didn't want. He had no idea it was a possibility. And it's an unprecedented turn of events. And it's an insane plot twist. It really is, because the whole book is kind of the premise of there's this pressure on franchises when they draft a prodigy, build it or they might leave. And, we've seen it like LeBron in Cleveland, KD in Oklahoma City. I mean, you guys know all the, we can go on down the list. They successfully built it despite all kinds of drama, dysfunction, twists, turns, massive personnel whiffs, and they still built a contender around them. And then before the very next trade deadline, coming off of a finals appearance, they got rid of them. It's really an insane story.
Well, Josh, I'll let you go because I have like 7 questions reloaded in my brain.
No, it's okay. Yeah, because that was what stuck to me reading it, was the ending. Because obviously I didn't start digging into it actually until I didn't finish it till after the trade. I started it before the trade and then finished it after. And yeah, like you said, the ending is very optimistic. Be honest, when the trade happened, because you've got a lot of responsibilities with ESPN when the trade happens and confirming things. Where did "oh shit, my book" come up in your brain and when that trade happened? Was it number one?
No, it wasn't number one.
Okay.
Number one was, I cannot believe they actually did this. I was well aware of the frustration. People want to hear this stuff either, but it's true. Like, I was well aware, not just Nico, but throughout the organization, there was a lot of frustration with Luka. But dude, I mean, I always talk about a production to pain in the ass ratio. He could be a guy who's that productive, has the leeway to be a massive pain in the ass. And honestly, by NBA superstar standards, it's like they're I had somebody say, hey, ask Miami if they would have rather dealt with Luka or Jimmy Butler this season. So the initial reaction was, wow, flabbergasted, even though like I'd heard, well, if we have to trade him. And I was like, oh, sure, buddy. Sure. Okay. Yeah, I'm sure. I couldn't believe they actually did it, was the initial reaction. Obviously, the next reaction is, okay, hey, I got to get some reporting out on this, as far as, all the stuff I reported, the reasoning. And so, you're making phone calls, et cetera, et cetera. And it was certainly within that first half hour of like, I got to schedule a meeting with the folks at the publishing company, because that ending of the book, there's another chapter that needs to be written. And so that chapter was, I said, hey, I can turn this around relatively quickly. The trade, it was, basically the morning of February 2nd. I got it to him by February 14th. Well, it was a pretty busy time in my day job as well. I didn't sleep a whole lot those couple of weeks. And so I always take my wife on like an all-star weekend getaway, cash in some airline miles and Marriott points. And, this year we went off to St. Martin. We had a 6 a.m. flight on February 14th to Miami to connect, right? It covered, and it was a busy stretch of the schedule. I'd covered 5 games and 7 nights leading up to this, including the Mavs against the Heat, or the leftovers of the Mavs against the leftovers of the Heat the night before. Pulled an all-nighter, finished that chapter at 4 a.m. Grabbed my bag, my wife, off we go to vacation. So that's how the final chapter got handled.
So, as I reread the book again, I really only made it through the first half the second time, just because I started to get progressively pissier as and I got it. I
didn't know that it was possible to be pissier than you normally are, but go on.
Well, I mean, I want to circle back to this, but the challenge with this trade is it feels like the longest political cycle of my life, where there's news every day, and it's now 6 weeks and it just won't stop. When writing the kind of the pre-Dallas part of the book. How much of that did you know, and how much of it was like kind of a fact-finding mission? Because I really fell into Luka starting in 2016 when I was told about him.
Yeah.
I think that was the year that they played Oklahoma City. His overseas team played Oklahoma City. And it's like, who's this guy?
Yeah,
and
who's this baby-faced kid that's matched up with Russell Westbrook for some of this game?
The early parts of the book read like Paul Bunyan. It's just sort of like a folktale type thing. So how much of that did you know, and how much of that was kind of a surprise and discovery?
Well, a lot of it was discovery. And I'll be honest with you guys, like, I don't really delve into draft prospects. We've got people who do that on a full-time basis. Jonathan Gavoni's the best in the business of that. I don't watch college basketball hardly at all. I watch a little bit of March Madness. I'm not like I'm aware of EuroLeague, and like I'm kind of so like I was aware of Luka, but I didn't until like right as that draft when it was pretty clear that the Mavericks were honing in on him. I didn't know much about him. I read Mina Kimes' story on him that ran on in ESPN.
That story I hold is one of a few reasons, other than Vlade Divac not liking Luka's father, one of the two reasons why I think he fell in the draft. I honestly believe that.
Well, and what it did was it reinforced a lot of what was perceived to be negative intel on him, just in terms of like diet, conditioning, discipline, and hey, the thing is that intel was accurate. But he was
Double Conqueso is still the funniest nickname for Luka that didn't take.
But the crazy thing is, as accurate as that intel was, he was the most accomplished European teen prospect ever, and did it at the highest level of international bat. Like the EuroLeague's the second best league in the world. For Slovenia to win Eurobasket with him starring alongside Goran Dragic, Slovenia is a tiny country, 2 million people. They're beating countries that are 25, 30, whatever times their size. He was so accomplished and yet still really misevaluated. I mean, think about the fact he wasn't the number one pick in the draft when, by the way, Igor Koskov, the Slovenian national team coach, was hired by the Suns. They never asked his opinion. He gave it to him kind of at the last, hey, I've got to get this off my chest. What the hell are we doing? Draft this kid, put a massive offer sheet on the table for Clint Capella, and we've got our trio to build around. It would have been Luka with a lob threat and Devin Booker. Could you imagine? Vlade, a Balkan basketball legend, has known Luka's dad for years and years and years. One, he had, he knew, I was told by a scout with the Kings at the time that Vlade, quote, knew too much. And two, Vlade really misevaluated the guy. We've got De'Aaron Fox. Why do we need Luka? Luka, he'll want the ball. But he didn't think he was that good. The Hawks would have drafted Luka if not for the trade. They had him a little bit above Trae Young, but they felt like getting a second lottery pick was more than enough justification to pull that swap. But dude, I talked to an executive on another team that was in the upper half of that lottery. And he was like, yeah, we had Luka, I think he said 4th on our board. He's going to be really good. He's going to be a really good player. Don't think he'll be an all-star. He can't be a point guard. The comp that he gave him was like, he's like a Hito Turkoglu type of guy. This guy's not going to, but dude, nobody, I shouldn't say nobody. A lot of people did not think Luka Doncic could be a primary ball handler in the NBA. Wasn't athletic enough. And then, all the other stuff, the diet, the discipline, blah, blah, blah. It's insane. This guy did more as a teenager in Europe than anybody ever has. And there were still significant doubts about him in terms of being a superstar in the NBA.
It's so funny because with hindsight in mind, it really feels like his Lasso, his coach, the coach that he played with the longest over there, really seemed to understand that Luka thrived when being challenged and put him in specific situations where he would almost have to constantly earn it. And I wonder if that resulted in some misevaluation where it's like, oh, he can't handle the ball because he hasn't.
Well, but you know what? I'll say this, like the NBA people understand how hard it is for young kids to get playing time for the best teams in the EuroLeague. And they understand how often do you see guys that are lottery prospects that you look at their EuroLeague stats, you're like, this guy barely played. So that, it's not like Luka, especially when he was one of the youngest EuroLeague players ever. It's not like him not being a rotation player at 16 was any kind of like red flag. It's like, dude, the guy's playing for Real Madrid's top team at 16. This is insane.
And I'll stop talking and let Josh ask the question. But the thing in the book that kept coming back to me, that with Luka being hurt from Christmas on, and I just sort of, when out of sight, out of mind, I was constantly reminded of Luka's ruthlessness when on the court in this book. And I mean that as an extreme compliment to Doncic. I think the thing that separates him from other great players is that ruthless streak. And it really comes through in the book. Josh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I was thinking, so you've been covering Luka since he got to Dallas in 2018. And I think it's, we all know he's not the most open athlete and doesn't really care for media interviews. It's just not on his list. He doesn't, doesn't care about the attention. How did your relationship with him affect how you were writing the book? Because I know it obviously starts in one place. I know there was obviously the blow up after that Phoenix game publicly for you, but did that make at any point, did writing the book become more challenging than you anticipated because of Luka's relationship with you, or did that not even really matter because you were talking to other sources and you're getting it done regardless whether he likes it or not?
When I was discussing the possibility of signing this book deal, I said, hey, listen, like, I am not going to anticipate any cooperation from Luka. Like you said, he's just not a guy who enjoys interacting with the media. He's not an open book, so to speak. And that's fine. But I was like, that's why I'm like, it's not going to be like a typical biography. It's going to be more about like the business of basketball through the prism of Luka and the Mavericks. So like his lack of cooperation was not a problem whatsoever. Obviously his voice is in there plenty. I mean, I've covered his entire career. But I didn't, if he would have wanted, and I let his people know, hey, listen, I'm not asking, but if he wants to sit down with me, absolutely. But I knew that he wouldn't. I'll be honest with you. When I went to Slovenia and I went to Europe with his, to watch his national team play, I announced that the book was happening just before that. And he was not happy. He did not make eye contact with me the entire trip. And I talked to, people, in his camp. And basically I said, listen, I think there's concerns I was going to like try to dig up stuff in his personal life. And I said, hey, the guy's personal life is his personal life.
It's a basketball book.
It's his private life. I said, this is a book about basketball and the business of basketball. Yeah. I'm not going to delve into, family stuff, whatever. Like that's I said, that's off limits. And, I held up to that. And after that, he relaxed a little bit. It's interesting. I've been told that Luka is mad at me now. There was some of the reporting, which I get it. It wasn't flattering, but at the same time, I didn't trade him, and it's my job to explain why the trade was made. So, and that's fine. As I told one of his teammates who asked me about it in LA, one of his new teammates, I said, I don't think he was going to invite me to his birthday party anyway. So, but my whole thing is, am I fair? Am I accurate? Am I putting things in the proper context? And if I can answer yes to all those things, like, then I've held up my end. And the Booker thing, the book when he got the Booker fan tossed, obviously, there was a public thing there where he calls me out in the press conference, and I'm always trying to make him look bad, and which
the fans have latched on to that.
Oh, for sure,
in a tangible way.
You know what? It's fine. I get it. Like it's like my job's not always pleasant, and Luka felt a certain way, but we talked about a week later, and I basically just told him what I just told you about, fairness, accuracy, context. And I did tell him, I said, hey, if you don't feel like I'm holding up my end on those things, I would much rather have a private conversation about it, or talk to, Laura Beth, his business manager, have her talk to me, or somebody with the Mass PR, or Bill Duffy, his agent, and then honestly, after that, the rest of last season, I'm not saying like Luka was inviting me out to dinner or anything. Obviously he wasn't, but we were fine. we were fine even going into this season in terms like there's no hostility or anything like that. And I tell you, he was challenging to cover. For some reasons, he was also absolutely fascinating.
Well, I think at a certain point he's going to miss the quaintness of the Dallas media coverage compared to the LA Zoo.
I'll tell you what, though, some of those LA media types, they might as well get fitted for some Lakers girl uniforms. There's some rah-rah going on.
Well, Josh, go ahead.
No. Yeah, well, I was wondering. You're doing so much reporting on the book, and you talked about right at the top of the show about how shocking the trade was.
Mm-hmm.
When the trade happened, did you go back through what you had collected for the book and your reporting, and were you like, was it there? Like, was there something there that could have explained this, or was it too many regime changes? Because obviously the front office that traded Luka is not the front office that drafted him and the initial group that he dealt with, or Is there any of that where you could follow the breadcrumb? Because I was reading through the book and I was like, oh, there's little tidbits here, but nothing that would think trade him.
Well, and first of all, to be clear, I was shocked by the and I was the same like Shams, checking it like, is this really Shams' account? What the hell's going on?
His
here?
interview, I don't remember with who, but I
think it was Young Man 3.
Yeah, just talking about how nervous he was, which is. He's been doing, I know he's a younger guy, but he's got enough, tread on his tires at this point to where you think something like that wouldn't make him nervous. And it was, God.
But, you asked kind of about breadcrumbs in the book. And look, I'm glad that I approached it, the writing of it, like honestly, and it wasn't just like all fluff. Now, a lot of the book, and you guys have read it, like the book's being written because the guy is historically talented and gifted and one of the best basketball players that we've ever seen. And I think, you talk about like his ruthless competitiveness really coming through. Obviously, there's a lot in there just about how insanely talented this guy is. But like the flaws are addressed, the discipline, conditioning, diet stuff is addressed throughout the book, just like I've addressed it with my reporting.
Sure.
Throughout his career, some of the petulance, especially, with the refs, some of the internal relationship stuff, which, by the way, it's not like Luka was at fault solely or even primarily for most of the relationships that went sour. He was part of it, but, I would say the older people were usually primarily at fault. But all that stuff's addressed in the book. And then obviously Cuban selling the team. If Cuban doesn't sell the team, this never happens. And Cubans, I don't know if Cuban just flat out lied about having basketball control or just felt like if he said it enough, it would come true or whatever the case was. I'm serious. I really don't know.
I don't know either.
It was not discussed in terms of while they were making the deal. It wasn't part of the language of the contract, obviously. But there is a 0.0% chance that Mark Cuban would have ever signed off on this deal. And look, the organizational priority for the last 6 years was absolutely, positively, and I would argue in a lot of cases rightfully, kissing Luka's butt, trying to make sure he's as happy as possible and never, trying to prevent him from having any reason to ever look to leave. And then they shanked him in the back. It's shocking. The one thing, and again, people have gotten mad at me about like a couple years ago about the reporting of the fear within the organization. And Luka kind of called me out in that press conference at the end of that season as well. And again, he never threatened. As far as I know, he never even verbalized that he was considering that. And I will say, and I've said this many times, I don't think Luka ever would have looked for reasons to leave. There was certainly a time, especially at that point, where I thought those reasons might smack him in the face, right? I mean, dude, the KP trade went kaput. The Brunson thing, the Mavericks absolutely botched that situation. Lose your second best player from a conference finals team for nothing is, massive roster mismanagement. They trade for Kyrie. They have to tank. If this team misses the playoffs again last season, it was going to be tough. Mm-hmm. And like, how could he not think, dude, I'm a perennial first team All NBA player. We can't even make the playoffs. But the guy does have a strong sense of loyalty. And that's something that, I try to use his experience with the Slovenian national, his commitment to the Slovenian national team, which is unwavering, which is not the norm, as you guys know, for NBA stars. And then the fact that he's playing for Slovenia at all, when he could have played for Spain, an established international power, as I kind of try to use that to show, like, hey, the guy's natural state is he's loyal to the people who are loyal to him.
Mm-hmm. God, there's so many ways I want to go from there. With hindsight in mind, and I've often wondered this, when Luka came to the organization, it seemed like, and in your book confirms this, Raul Bob talks about this, it feels like by marching out the red carpet and sort of saying, this is your franchise now, they didn't set up, I don't know if guardrails is the right word, but it feels like a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, where if you're immediately worried that something bad is going to happen, then something bad is going to happen. And from what we've seen with Luka historically, and granted he was a younger man then, but it seemed like he always thrived under challenges. And, I know Mark Cuban fostered this organization where it's like everybody who works here has to work here until the end of time. That's not how businesses function. So do you think by being so long-term in their thinking, they really sort of shot themselves in the foot by creating this? It's like they created a culture of fear out of nothing.
But you know what? That's not a unique thing to the Mavericks. That's just the reality of the NBA, especially today, in the player empowerment era. I mean, hell, the Spurs won a title with Kawhi and still ended up losing them. KD gave the Thunder 9 spectacular years, but they end up losing him. LeBron goes back to Cleveland, but the decision kind of was just a league altering type of deal. Even like James Harden, Houston, we go on down the list. So it's not a unique fear to the Mavericks. It's just really kind of the reality of life in the NBA. Honestly, I think the worst thing that happened in the Mavericks or in Luka's rookie season was that his relationship with Rick Carlisle was severely damaged a week into his career. That team meeting that I wrote about that they had in Toronto was a total disaster. And, Rick really just cracked the foundation of a relationship that he was trying to build, and it never got repaired, literally 4 games into Luka's career. And then Rick, obviously he's a brilliant guy. He figured out at a certain point during Luka's rookie year, he figured out, okay, if this is a power struggle, this is the one that I can't win. He was always able to, Rick was always able to kind of rule with an iron fist in the Mavericks organization. But if it was Luka versus Rick, Rick wasn't going to win. And ultimately, that led to Rick's departure. But Rick's strategy from that point on was to kiss Luka's butt regardless of circumstances. And so Rick lost the ability to challenge Luka because he feared his job security, frankly.
That's and that just sort of speaks to what I'm thinking, at least, because in all business relationships you go through rocky times. And during my time that I've been both a fan and sitting on my couch covering this team, it's always looked like and I'm sure this is true in every sports franchise, but like appearances were often, this is why fans react so grumpily to your reporting, because Cuban would always put out, look how amazing all of my decisions have been all the time. We don't need Dwight Howard. We never wanted Dwight Howard. And it paints this picture that's never been true. And like, at least, there's with what we have now, and I want to get to that in a little bit later, but with what we have now, we at least have a little too much honesty from the current group.
Well, and frankly, like Patrick Dumont has shown that he just doesn't really understand the NBA and basketball
or people.
Yeah. I mean, like it's Patrick Dumont speaking publicly about basketball is not been in anybody's best interest. I would
Josh,
say.
what else do you have here? Because we'll circle back to this other stuff.
No, yeah. You were talking about how every NBA franchise kind of has that innate fear with the player empowerment era. With the Mavericks, I think it's interesting because this was the first time they've ever had to deal with it, because you've had Dirk for forever and they never had to worry about it. And then even as Dirk aged out, you know, and the player empowerment era started, it's not like at that point Dirk was going to go anywhere. So do you feel like that was hard? You know, I know you get into it in the book and all of the front office turmoil, but could you speak to that group not being experienced with this kind of new age of NBA and superstar?
And obviously it's like a what a storybook deal. You know, you got the best player in European history handing the baton to the guy who, you know, might take that throne. And you know, the storybook is, hey, 21 years of Dirk, and then, you know, Luka's entire career, and Luka's just going to be happy-go-lucky. And then, you know, not that Dirk was always happy, but Dirk like never, ever, ever seriously considered leaving Dallas, and like kept taking discounts and all that kind of stuff. But they weren't naive thinking, hey, just like Dirk, it's going to be the same exact thing. They knew how unique Dirk was, you know, and just like in San Antonio, Duncan passed the baton to Kawhi. They're different people. So yeah, it was definitely a new experience, but honestly, man, there was just so much Game of Thrones type of stuff going on in the front office and the coaching staff. Like there was just, it was such an epically dysfunctional franchise. And really, it's almost miraculous that they were able to have everything that happened happen and successfully still managed to build a contender around Luka.
You could argue they failed up in a lot of circumstances.
Yeah, and then in doing so, you give up your ownership of your draft capital, your first round capital, from 27 to 30.
Oh, we know.
You know
we
what?
talk about it every day.
Were you aware of that? I'm in Houston now. How much better do you think they feel about having that 29 Mavs pick than they did? I don't know, like January 30th.
It's not only do they all the Mavericks rivals own their picks.
That's the
Spurs in 2030. And I said at the time that was a steep price to pay to get the Grant Williams sign and trade facilitated, even if it had panned out. But anyways, and that's what, like, when you with Luka, maybe they'll end up being right. Maybe his prime's going to be Embiid like right now. I don't know, man. I wouldn't bet against the talent. I'll say that. But with Luka, you at least could realistically feel like, dude, there's a decade-long runway here. And by Nico's own words, they crunch that down to 3 to 4 years. And that's when the credit card payments are due on what you did to scramble to build a finals team around Luka.
So I have one more book question, and then I do have other questions. So what was your favorite part, either writing or reporting, during this whole book process?
Honestly, despite the fact that Luka wouldn't make eye contact with me during my trip to Slovenia, I loved my visit to Slovenia. You
got to spend some time with Iztok Franco.
Dude, Iztok was the most unbelievable volunteer tour guide. I'd interacted with him, you know, on social media, but we had never met before I made the trip.
Oh, wow.
And I reached out. I'm serious. I reached out and I was like, hey, you know, I'm making this trip. Like, can you give me some advice on like where I should stay? Anyways, that it went from, hey, like he was every single day. He'd come pick me up. Like, you know, we drove all over Slovenia. The man picked me up at the airport in Zagreb, Croatia, which is like 90 minutes away. So the first time, and I was like, dude, I'll get a car. It's okay. No, I insist. The first time I ever met Iztok, like face to face, was at the baggage claim in Zagreb, Croatia, where he drove me into Ljubljana. And just like, in all seriousness, Slovenia is a beautiful country. Like, I would vacation in Slovenia if I wasn't like fearful. but no, seriously, like, dude, Lake Bled is one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. Like the hiking and all that stuff. I didn't get to see some of the rivers, but there's like all these cool old castles. But also just getting to talk to a bunch of people in the in the Slovenian basketball community, kind of getting a feel for where Luka's from, talking to people who like knew him when he was a kid, talk to, Nikola Mirotic, right? Mm-hmm. So before Luka, he was the highest Slovenian draft pick in NBA history. And he caught wind that I was over there and he DM'd me on he DM'd me and invited me out to hang out with so I didn't go. They played like a warm-up game basically against Germany. And he's like, hey, you want to come like watch that with my buddies at the bar? And then they were watching F1. It was like their F1 fantasy league. So I hung out with Nikola Mirotic and his buddies. And one of his buddies was a guy who was like the last man on Slovenia's under-16 team when Luka played that friendly tournament in Hungary. It was the only time he'd played with the Slovenian national program before Eurobasket. But since it was a friendly, he still had his, international free agency if you'd wanted. And then, he's the one, there's a story in there about Luka, like a Pat Bev type guy for Romania, catching Luka with an elbow, blood trickling. Luka's over there on the bench, like with a towel. And as soon as like he can get the blood to stop, slams the towel down, put me in the game, goes in there, calls, sets up. So he's running a pick and roll, gets that guy and help defense, dunks on his head, grabs the ball, slams it in his chest and says some words that challenge the young fella's manhood. Which I thought, you talk about like the ruthless competitor in Luka. It's like that was something that always existed. And I love that story because I'm like, yes, he has always been that dude. So now my favorite part of the reporting was definitely making the trip to Slovenia, seeing that country, kind of experiencing the culture there, and meeting some really cool people.
That's good. We Iztok wrote for us first, and then I kept him on just because I loved arguing with him. Like I argue, like he kind of actually drives us crazy, but in a good, friendly basketball way.
Yeah.
That's really fun. Josh, do you have anything else book adjacent?
The only thing book adjacent, but just kind of going off, just thinking, we talk about the ruthlessness.
Yeah.
What's so funny is what's come out of this trade. And I guess this isn't really book related, not necessarily book related, but Nico Harrison has. Kirk loves how often Nico Harrison quotes Kobe Bryant and references his relationship with Kobe Bryant and Mamba mentality.
Yeah.
How did that? I'm just wondering. Did Luka's ruthless competitiveness, like? There's a part of me that's like, how did that click there? But I guess it's obviously all the other stuff you've reported. All the off courts.
And to be clear, like. When you say off-court stuff, you're talking about diet. You're talking about
nothing
conditioning.
Terrible.
Like Luka's never been in any kind of off-court trouble.
Ever.
Like there's nothing there. Now, can he be defiant? Can he be kind of disrespectful? Did that play a part in the relationship with Nico and frankly with J Kidd Frang? Yeah, sure. But it's funny. I actually just was on ESPN LA radio and they kind of asked me about like, how is he this competitive, but doesn't care about the preparation stuff? And it gets back to he has to be challenged. Like to get him to be really engaged in a practice, there had to be, whether it was a drill or scrimmage or whatever, there had to be a winner and there had to be a loser. He's always looking for he's always looking to compete. Even like the half court shots and the push-ups, there's always got to be. He's always down to compete, but just like boring, tedious prep stuff, he's never showed interest in it. And I shouldn't say never. He's not consistently committed to it, because there have been times where, it's like Courtney Lee's famous Instagram comments, skinny Luka gonna be a problem. There have been times where Luka has committed in the off season and you've seen it. Now you talk about being challenged. Boy, did the Mavericks blatantly disrespect him, slap him in the face. And if this doesn't get him to kind of lock in with that type of focus, then probably nothing ever will. The other thing, though, honestly, I know that some people might consider Shaq to be this like perfect example of a hardworking superstar. But the simple fact is Shaquille O'Neal very blatantly would even brag about playing his way into shape every single season. Like he was not a guy who would honestly sweat during the summer. And some guys are just so talented that conditioning can be an issue year after year after year after year, and they still end up being all-time greats.
Yeah, it's so funny. We keep talking about like the flaws in the conditioning, and it's almost like if you didn't look at anything else about it, you think we're talking about a guy that's like maybe made a couple all-star teams, maybe made the playoffs once or twice. It's like, dude, he went to the finals. He's been first team All-NBA more times than almost anyone at that age. At 26 years old, he's already been there 5 times. Like, it's just so funny to me that we talk, well, not to say that he's a perfect player, but you just get back to his record and it's like, what are we talking about here?
He has his flaws, but there are very, very few who have been as accomplished at age 26 as Luka Doncic. And to, Dumont's statement of you can't win that way, like, dude,
you've won that way.
Yes. And like, he's been to the conference finals, and then with a completely different cast around him, has been to the finals. And like, dude, I mean, the list of guys who have been the best player on championship teams in their early 20s, who are we talking about? We can argue Magic, but he had Kareem. Not to further antagonize a fan base that loves me a lot, but Dwayne Wade is kind of the one guy who I can think of in recent NBA history who you can say that about. It's not normal, and like just to trade him months after a finals appearance is bold. Oh boy, it is bold.
It's patently insane. And to circle back when we're talking about his competitiveness, and this is just something I think about. We talk to our staffers about this regularly, where it's like, look, guys, if you can't do the work or don't want to do the work anymore, that's okay. Let's leave before the relationship becomes contentious. And I think that I will hold in my mind's eye until the day I die that Cuban's insistence on everybody being hunky-dory and sticking together and keeping the same staffers in the same position forever is one of the things which led to where the Mavericks are right now, because it's okay if Carlisle and Luka Doncic's relationship frayed. Sometimes you have to move on. And the Mavericks, and this is true of a lot of sports teams, but what I'm getting at is do we think that like the Mavericks really understand that, like, even like right now, for example, the Mavericks are past their expiration date. I heard you and Tim Bontemps have a really lively animated discussion about this on the Hoop Collective the other day, where you are of the opinion that the Mavericks won't recognize that they're currently in a bad spot.
Obviously, but they can't. They are all in on this group right now. And like, the Kyrie knee injury is obviously a crushing blow. Like, forget about this year, and we'll see about next year. So in a 3 to 4 year time frame, at least year one is just dust. And, year two is at least significantly, your odds are significantly lower.
See, that's,
but again, you can't like pivot into a rebuild. Like, what? Are you serious?
Immediately, right now? Because
they're going to have a lottery pick. They're going to have a lottery pick this year, and like, they could lose every game the rest of the season. They're not going to move up significantly in the lottery standings, because
I think they're going to make the play in whether they want to or not.
Well, the Suns, I've got a big story on what a mess the Suns are on ESPN.com today. The Suns sure as hell aren't like making a charge here. So whatever, they'll have a lottery pick. Unless they get lucky for the first time in franchise history, it'll probably be a late lottery pick.
That would do nothing for the conspiracy theory that are about it.
But then again, my point is, like, if you pivot into a rebuild, so let's just use the Suns as an example. If the Suns wanted to pivot into a rebuild, they could trade Devin Booker to Houston and get back a significant chunk of their draft capital. That's not there for the Mavericks. Well, because their draft capital, first of all, so let's say they pivot into rebuild, and next year is a painful, ugly year. So you get one high lottery pick, and then you're sending one to Charlotte. That's top 2 protected. You want to take those chances. Then you're sending an unprotected swap to Oklahoma City, and then you're sending an unprotected pick here in Houston, and then you're sending an unprotected swap to San Antonio.
And that's why I think they should start now, because they're
you're only getting one pick out of it. This year's pick is what it is. Next year, you get a 26 pick out of it, and that's all a rebuild. That's the payoff from a rebuild. The payoff for being bad is if you have your own picks. If you don't have your own picks, there's no benefit in being bad.
I think you move on from Anthony Davis and acquire what you can. I think you do right by anybody that wants to be moved and just start going, because I think they end up in that spot anyways.
Well,
because they're not going to be an attractive destination. I think with what's happened here, the trading of Luka Doncic and the means that they did, whatever sort of player capital the organization had, I don't think exists anymore.
Well,
it's not going to be a place where I think players will want to come play.
I do think that, it's not been a good look with Luka and the Luka trade and the aftermath from a fan perspective, certainly, in terms of public relations. And I agree, there just the way that Luka really got dumped on, and people say, "Oh, you were the one doing it." I was reporting the reasoning from the team. Like that's
why I've lost my mind. When we talk about organizations, the casual fan thinks these organizations are big, like corporations. There's not that many people involved. There's only so many people it could be, and it kind of makes me lose my mind here. Where it's like, I thought. And granted, I could be misreading him, but I thought Kyrie Irving's comments to the media following the first Lakers game were very coded, saying, "Can we just relax with all of this?" and aimed at his own management. Now, I could be wrong there. It's just me maybe wish casting, but I'm sort of to the point now. And CeeDee Lamb said it yesterday, where he said the Luka trade's killed this city, and that's.
I don't know if Cowboys need to be talking about what a
right. Oh my God. Talking about it's just put a stink on things, and that's where we have a weirdly loyal fan base. We including the people who are here in the middle of their business day. Thank you guys. And we're Josh and I are I'm a Mavericks fan. Josh's fandom died after attempting to be a beat reporter several years ago. And now he just sticks with me because I drag him along. But I just think we're in for a really rough ride, and that just stinks because they were on top of the mountain, and I don't think they realized it.
I would say that the one, and it's a massive if now, because the Kyrie knee injury is just, ACLs, or you don't know how long it's going to take to come back. Can he be the same? All that. If this team was healthy, and it's a huge if, and we haven't seen it yet because we haven't seen literally a second of Lively playing next AD, but we the first half of AD against Houston, the Mavericks were going to still be a force to be reckoned with. I don't think they would have beaten Oklahoma City in a playoff series. I'm not saying they would have won the West, but they were going to be a damn good team. As I talked to obviously just a bunch of executive scouts and people around the league about this. Nobody outside the Dallas organization has told me they thought this was a good move for the Mavericks. Not a single person. But I have had, I had a GM of a Western Conference playoff team tell me, he's like, you can make a credible argument that they got better this season. Now, I wouldn't disagree, because look, the Mavericks are going to be a threat if Luka came back and was right. They were they win 14 of their last 17 games before Christmas. But this group with the biggest, most athletic front court in the NBA, certainly you need Kyrie to be at a star level, and you're asking a lot of him, physically as the only real primary ball handler. But there is a world or a scenario in where the Mavericks, I think, can still be a threat next year. It's really hard to say that with Kyrie coming off that knee injury.
Yeah. Sure. I think that's what makes the trade. I mean, obviously that's what makes the trade feel even worse for Mavericks fans, is they still wouldn't be over it right now. But if at least the vision of the team that they're trying to sell people could at least be out there on the floor, it can at least give some sort of distraction. Because even if it isn't a championship team, like you said, Tim, it's an interesting team, because there's not a lot of teams that are going all in on front court size like this. I mean, how many teams are going to say, we are dedicating, a 4 and a 5 man that look more commonplace in, 2005 maybe.
Well, and it's interesting.
So it would have been, there's zigging instead of, it would have been different. We could have talked about something that's new, at least. I don't know, grasping at straws for positivity.
But it is interesting that they're not the only one that's going in that direction. Obviously, Oklahoma City getting Hartenstein over the summer, and pairing him some with Holmgren. Obviously, they haven't been able to do that as much as they hope, but that's a team that decided, after frankly Lively ate them up, that's a team that decided to go big. The Cavaliers have resisted the calls. And I was one of the people saying, you got to split the bigs. You got to move Allen, and, Evan Mobley's the center. Well, they didn't take my great advice, and they're very happy they didn't. I mean, they're going to win. They might win 70 games. Who knows? They're going to win 68 games or whatever. There's some other teams that are playing big more often. And I forgot who I was talking to somebody recently, and they mentioned like the change in the officiating mid-season, like right after Luka's 73-point game last year, the change in the officiating to be more physical has kind of encouraged teams to go bigger again.
Because the paint was very much a you shall not pass sort of place for the Dallas Mavericks this year or last year. So
yeah.
Well, Josh, you got anything else? I could probably ask Tim 100 more questions because I want to talk, but I've never asked him on the show before because I don't really like bothering our friends who are in media because you guys got enough stuff to do during the day. But maybe I'll try to bother you in the preseason before things get fired up next year, and I will. We can talk a little ball, a little process. I'm very fascinated by the reporter life. Mavs Moneyball let me go to one practice, New Year's Day, 2013. They came to Washington, D.C. Rick Carlisle yelled at me, and I decided,
I can't relate.
I decided then that it was not like, and I don't mind getting yelled at. Strangers yell at me on the internet, but I was just like, this is not for me. Now, had I been a parent first,
what did Rick yell at you about? I was
standing somewhere I shouldn't have been and wasn't paying attention, and he was just like. It was my fault, but still, it was.
But Rick was very like diplomatic and understanding about it, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is with that guy. What a charmer he was as well.
I had a few times we butted heads.
That's what I'll say. Tim, thank you so much for talking about your book. We will put a link to the book in the notes. And guys, just let me make the pitch to Tim. Look, right now, a lot of us who follow this team are still are chapped and aren't going to be anything other than pissed for a long time. This book is going to be a bit of an artifact, and I mean that in a really positive way because it speaks to what the Luka experience was like in a real way, and I think everyone who likes Luka will enjoy it. It brings back a lot of memories that I think you'll want to have at some point again. There's just been so much. I mean, Luka played 400 games in a Mavericks uniform plus playoffs. Like there's a lot of there. And the Mavericks are this close, and I know this trade has sort of sullied that. But in the long run, I think you'll want to return to this. The book cover is really cool. The book jacket design really is great, and it's an enjoyable read. I mean, Josh and I, when we got it, we're like, well, we're here for this. Do we know a lot of this stuff? And the answer was no, we didn't. And so I'm glad we did. So it's been great, Tim. Thank you so much.
Well, hey man, I really appreciate you saying that, and I really do hope that people will read it and think it's it is a fair, a fair portrayal of one of the most fascinating players, certainly in modern NBA history, and the most talented player, with all due respect to Dirk, to ever wear a Mavericks uniform.
Yeah. Well, on behalf of Josh Bowe, Tim MacMahon, this is Kirk Henderson. Thank you so much for hanging out with Pod Maverick. Josh and I will be back live tonight after the Rockets game, which I'm oddly looking forward to this. Watching the Rockets play is like watching a buzzsaw, so that should be really entertaining. Everybody, thanks for hanging out, and check us back a little later tonight. Everybody be good. Go Mavs.
Adios, amigos.